The plane involved in the accident was a Boeing 747-100 or 200 model. The 100 model went into commercial service in January of 1970. It was followed by the 200 model, which went into commercial service 3 years later in 1973. TWA has one of the oldest fleets of these aircraft in the air. The average age of TWA's fleet is 18.5 years old. The 747 is a huge aircraft. Even empty, it weighs more than 175 tons. The reports of the crash include descriptions of a huge fireball. The 747 uses about a third of its fuel load after takeoff, just getting to altitude. So, however high it was when the explosion occurred, there was still plenty of fuel on board.
Busy.
Marcia Evans has been calling the TWA information numbers for hours, trying to find out about her brother, Sheldon Lomder, and his family.
Busy. I don't know what to do. Maybe I should get on a plane and go to Kennedy, but what if he's fine?
After nearly 4 hours of trying, Evans gets through on a number broadcast on TV.
Yes, ma'am. Is this the hotline for the crash?
But this number is for crew members' families only.
Yes, ma'am.
Lomden lives in L.A., and Evans hasn't seen him for a couple years. The last time was a trip to New York with sister-in-law Emily, niece Abby, and nephew Zachary. The flight to Paris was a leg of a trip to Spain. Zachary's soccer team is competing in a tournament there.
The only reason I know that today was the day they were supposed to go, other than because my brother told me, and I've got it written down, it's also my grandmother's birthday.
I'm online with the 718.
With both of us working the phones, we finally get an answer.
I'm through. It's a recording about the special desk, information on relatives of the incident.
Thank you.
Evans waits, again, on hold for 12 minutes.
Flight 800. My brother was originally scheduled on that flight with his family. LOD, L is in Lincoln, O, D is in David.
The hotline can only take her name and promise a call back. So Evans is back where she started, waiting. And she won't sleep until she knows, one way or another.
I'm sure he's fine.
Heather Ishimaru, Channel 8 News.
There was fire on the ocean floor for hours afterwards during what one rescue worker called the darkest of nights. The horror was seen by vacationers in the water and on the shore.
Actually, I thought it was a movie prop. They're filming a movie about 4.5 miles west of where we are on Dune Road. And looked up, huge fireball.
Even before daylight, searchers in dozens of boats began finding bodies on the water, but no survivors. Daylight revealed how little was left on the surface. After only a couple of hours of sunlight, the Coast Guard had combed more than 2/3 of the area, finding nobody alive.
We still have our hopes up, and it depends what type of condition they're in, what they're wearing, and what their state is.
The parts of the jumbo jet that remained afloat were small. Witnesses saw the huge aircraft breaking apart in the air, but terrorism investigators cautioned against concluding so soon there was a bomb. President Clinton in Washington echoed the sentiment.
We will determine what happened. But for now, I want to caution again the American people against jumping to any conclusions and ask that today, overwhelmingly, our people remember the families of the people who were on that flight in their prayers.
All evidence, though, points to a catastrophic event, such as an explosion. An airline official saying the TWA pilots did not report trouble.
That there were no non-routine transmissions from the flight whatsoever, and no indication of any problem until the flight disappeared and went silent.
The first eerie images came late Wednesday night. Clumps of fiery debris burned for hours amid the bobbing lights of search boats.
All of a sudden, my husband pointed to the sky and said, "Look, somebody just shot up a flare." And we all looked up, and a couple seconds later, we just saw this burst of flames.
Then dozens of civilian craft joined the Coast Guard in a massive overnight search in the Atlantic Ocean.
There was debris all over. We ourselves picked up 3 bodies. And we turned them over to the Coast Guard out there on the scene.
I threw a Boatmate knot on it like you wouldn't believe.
Hundreds of rescue personnel rushed to help in pitch dark, lit only by the flames of burning wreckage. And I want to thank them for their brave work in these treacherous waters on behalf of the people who were on that flight.
By daylight, search teams found the remains of TWA Flight 800 spread in the water for miles. The Coast Guard is searching a 240 square mile area, looking for clues, debris, and the remains of those on board.
This is just a horrible tragedy, and I think it touches all of us as Americans. I just learned that there were a number of school children on this trip.
Pam Lichner of Houston and her two daughters were on the plane that exploded. Lichner was a former TWA flight attendant and was well known in Houston for founding the crime victims' rights group Justice for All.
Adored those children. I mean, probably as good a mother as I've ever seen. And that made me admire Pam more because of how she was as a mother and a parent.
The TWA plane was bound for Paris, where grief-stricken families arrived at the airport to hear the grim news in person. In New York, while families also awaited word, the first pieces of the plane were brought ashore. Investigators will try to rebuild as much of the 747 as possible in the hope of finding out what happened so suddenly in midair.
We do not have facts now, and we cannot tell you whether this was a bombing or not. We have no idea right now whether it was. We do not have the information necessary to make any conclusion about what caused this.
President Clinton reminded the nation that terrorism, while possible, is not yet certain.
We will determine what happened. But for now, I want to caution again the American people against jumping to any conclusions and ask that today, overwhelmingly, our people remember the families of the people who were on that flight in their prayers.
At this hour, the NTSB says it still considers this an accident, but the FBI has also begun a parallel investigation and sent a team of agents specializing in anti-terrorism. Brad Watson, Channel 8 News, East Moriches, New York.
Do not accept any gifts or articles from anyone, and keep your eyes on your unattended bags at all times. We're under a security alert. Can I take a look at your photo ID, please, ma'am?
From the moment passengers arrive at DFW, they will find security precautions a bit tighter than a few years ago, but no noticeable change in security since last October. In the wake of the World Trade Center bombing trial in New York, the FAA had ordered the nation's airports to bear down on security, start checking IDs, warn passengers about accepting any gifts or packages from strangers, and 1,500 parking spots close to the terminals at DFW were blocked. The parking edict was lifted after a few weeks, but the other precautions remain in effect. There are no noticeable changes in security here in the wake of the TWA crash, but it certainly is not being ignored. Susan Combs of Dallas is heading to Atlanta for the Olympics.
The over-coverage about the terrorist deal and how it's affecting the Olympics or because of the Olympics, it's really on my mind. Yeah.
But it's not going to stop you from going.
No, I just have to not think about it.
Those catching an early morning flight on TWA were not worried.
I don't think another TWA is going to go down.
Accidents happen, I guess. Can't do much about it. If you want to take it, you know, what can I say?
But you're going to go ahead and get on the plane today?
Sure, yeah, sure. I'm fine.
There was one hitch in the departure. One man carrying a toy pistol for his son forgot about it, was stopped at the metal detectors, questioned, and the gun was confiscated. It's not that uncommon.
Already this year, from January to June, we've already confiscated 44 handguns, 5 rifles and shotguns, 2 knives, and 3 brass knuckles. In all these instances, none have been evil intentions.
This is the lasting image people will remember. The floating, fiery wreckage surrounded by search boat lights will linger as the signature of the end of TWA Flight 800.
You've seen sneakers, suitcases, seats, all kinds of stuffing from the seats.
Randy Penny and his father headed out 9 miles in a friend's boat to help out at the crash overnight. They pulled out 3 bodies.
And there were 2, what was a young girl, I would think in her 20s, and still strapped in the seat of the plane.
The debris stretches for miles and miles across water 120 feet deep. Some pieces of aircraft are as long as 30 feet, but most are much smaller. Coast Guard rescuers found bodies, but no survivors.
I don't know if it's gonna hold. I hope we're finding just one is what really kept us going. We kept hoping that someone would call up on the radio and say, there's a whole group of live ones over here.
The dozens and dozens of bodies recovered all day were taken by truck to a makeshift morgue guarded by the FBI. The local medical examiner says evidence shows some victims apparently drowned. He speculates they were alive, though unconscious, when they hit the water.
We do not have facts now, and we cannot tell you whether this was a bombing or not. We have no idea right now whether it was. We do not have the information necessary to make any conclusion about what caused this.
No, it looks like a piece of an engine.
Finding the cause starts with witnesses, especially since many report seeing a flare zooming up before the explosion. The FBI questioned one woman for 2 hours over her precise description.
And I could not be more emphatic about this. The explosion happened first, the sound happened first, and then the fireball followed.
The possibility of terrorists causing the explosion is just that, a possibility.
We will determine what happened. But for now, I want to caution again the American people against jumping to any conclusions.
If it's an accident, we can deal with accidents, but if it's something that someone else is doing to us, it hurts.
The search will continue at the crash site all night by ships. Divers will resume their search Friday morning, weather permitting. Brad Watson, Channel 8 News, East Moriches, New York.
I'm Robert Riggs. A peculiar blip on an air controller's radar screen raised the possibility that an anti-aircraft missile, similar to ones used by guerrillas, might have downed the TWA jumbo jet. Some witnesses saw a bright object shooting up toward the jetliner before the explosion.
I saw what appeared to be the sort of course and trajectory that you see when a shooting star enters the atmosphere. Almost immediately thereafter, I saw, in rapid succession, a small explosion and then a large explosion.
The Stinger is a shoulder-launched, heat-seeking anti-aircraft missile. Afghan rebels used it to inflict heavy losses on the Soviet Air Force. Its infrared sight can spot an aircraft in the dead of night. An inventory by the General Accounting Office discovered 40 Stinger missiles shipped to Desert Storm unaccounted for.
There's been a great deal of concern in the U.S. intelligence community that Stinger missiles that were provided to the Mujahideen, which were not recovered, could be used by militant groups that now are taking action against the United States. There's in fact been a buyback program by the agency trying to buy these back at premium price in order to get them off the market.
A written warning by a group calling itself the Movement for Islamic Change points to terrorism in the crash. The same group claimed responsibility for the terrorist bombing that killed 5 American soldiers in Saudi Arabia last year. A major Arabic newspaper received a letter on Wednesday warning of a strike on an American target, but it was not passed along. The same group has been suspected in the truck bombing that killed 23 American military personnel and injured 345 others housed outside a Saudi air base last month.
747s do not blow up in midair. That has never happened except by external causes.
Buck Revell was the FBI's chief of counterterrorism when a bomb killed 189 Americans aboard Pan Am Flight 103 in 1988. Searchers found a microchip amid debris spread for miles over Lockerbie, Scotland. It was used to detonate the bomb and led investigators to Libyan agents who hid the explosive device inside luggage.
We are all aghast and shocked and outraged that such a tragedy could occur.
In Dallas, the governor of Oklahoma urged the public not to jump to conclusions about who is to blame. Early reports about the Oklahoma City bombing mistakenly linked it to Middle East terrorism. Investigators in the TWA crash will also examine if a delayed time bomb could have been planted aboard the jet when it originated out of Athens, or if it was an act of criminal sabotage. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.